Sounds good. Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Council Chambers on this chilly September 14th day. As you can see before you, there's an agenda. Before I go to administration to ask if there's anything to add, just wanted to acknowledge that Parkland County had a news release out earlier this afternoon stating that Mayor Chagas was injured in a farm accident. So our collective thoughts and prayers are with the Mayor Chagas and his family for a full and speedy recovery. Administration, anything to add?
No, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor, with the motion.
2020 regular council meeting agenda as presented.
Thank you, Your Worship. Deputy Mayor, members of council, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to public input session, item number 3. Town manager, has anybody submitted anything that needs to be read into the minutes for public input session?
No, Your Worship, we have not received any.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to presentations and delegations. There's none scheduled for tonight. There's also no statutory public hearings. So moving on to adoption of council minutes. So 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3. Councillor Meyer, please.
The Town Council approve the Town Council meeting minutes as presented.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Meyer. So members of council, if you had a chance to go over the minutes, any errors or omissions on those? Okay. I didn't see any either, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay. And that is carried. Moving on to council boards, commissions, and committee minutes, 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3. Councilor Plechko, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council received the council board and committee minutes for information.
Okay. Thank you very much. Members of council, you had a chance to read the minutes. Any questions or comments regarding those committee minutes and board minutes to our representatives? Councillor Manis, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question through you to the representative of the Meridian Housing Foundation. 2 questions. I noticed there was comments with regards to the resident waiting list, and I'm wondering with COVID-19 and maybe more emphasis, I noticed, for example, in my family, very interested in being at home as opposed to in a home or a place, for example, like the Meridian Foundation would offer. And I'm wondering if you've noticed any changes in the waiting lists or if we're still as high as we've ever been. And then my second question is regarding the capital campaign. Well, it's not it's a comment. I was reading some information on capital campaigns, and it basically talked about that if you have a video on your page, that they're 80% more successful in terms of achieving their financial goals. And so it was a really good article, and just wanted to share that comment with you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Manis. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not quite sure about the first question. Was it on vacancies at the Meridian Housing Foundation?
Regarding the waiting list. So have you seen, say, a reduction in the number of people on that list as a result of COVID-19 and maybe some of the changes that society is dealing with?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, we haven't really noticed much of a change in our waiting lists. Our vacancy rate has remained fairly steady in that there aren't very little vacancies. The only thing is that when people have moved out during COVID, we haven't necessarily gone above and beyond to fill that space. And anyone moving in during this pandemic have had to quarantine for 2 weeks in their room. So some people have opted not to take what is available because of that. But the waiting list, except for the affordable housing project, the Folkestone Manor, on our waiting list, that keeps going up. So more and more people are interested in that affordable housing project that is that is progressing right now. And the second one was on fundraising. And Mr. Mayor, we haven't really tendered, but we have several videographers that we are talking to about doing exactly that, getting our profile, our story told, and putting it on the webpage, and also using it for media, social media. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions and comments regarding that? Okay. See none more. Maybe just a question for the members of the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board. I noticed that there was a hearing that happened a while ago. At the end of the minutes, it says that a decision would be made within 15 days, and there was no statement of what the decision was. Do we normally register that in our minutes so that we know what the decision was?
Your Worship, I could speak to that. So the SDAB under the MGA has 15 days to render the decision. So they did adjourn the meeting before they had made the decision, and that's why it's not reflected in the minutes. But the decision letter is posted publicly on the website along with the minutes as well, so it's available there for public consumption. So it's been maybe a little bit of a change in the SDAB, just how we've run it, but that is following the MGA requirements.
Thank you. Got any more questions on the board? Yes, Councillor Bennett. Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not really a question, just clarification. Last council meeting, there were a couple questions on the Meridian Housing Foundation minutes. It was by mistake that we submitted them without being accepted by the board. So now you see that they are accepted by the board. And last time we had a question about the housing needs assessment report and whether or not we're sharing that publicly. I was told today that on September 9th, the summary of that report was sent to our town managers, our CAOs, and so hopefully you'll get information on exactly what was in the housing needs assessment.
Thank you
Yeah,
for
Your
that. And
Worship,
I'm guessing
maybe
it'll come for for adopt for information for council at the next council meeting.
Your Worship, I mean, the intent was that it would be provided for council for information, yes. Tabled publicly, I mean, that's a opportunity we can, use if we would like. But I was actually, Your Worship, it was just going to be sent out to council as information via email for your information. That's it, simple.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just then to the representative of the Marine Foundation, do we need to accept it formally as a council, or does that just information just shared through an email so that we have the report? Is that all right?
Mr. Mayor, the Meridian Housing Foundation is just supplying that for council's information.
Okay, good. Good. So an email sent out would be acceptable. Thank you. Any other questions regarding the board's committee minutes? Okay, seeing none. We have a motion from Councilor Pletchko to accept for information. Call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that is carried. Moving on to bylaws, which is 8.1, is the bylaw on code of conduct. Go ahead, administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will just ask our General Manager of Corporate Services to present this bylaw for council discussion and debate.
Thank you to Your Worship and all of council. So as a reminder, where this bylaw came from, back in February of 2018, the Municipal Government Act did require us to put in place this code of conduct. And as part of just good practice and regular review, we've asked a consultant to provide us some feedback on the bylaw so that we continue to improve this. I'll just say that, this is really council's bylaw, and so we will, help you get what needs to be into the bylaw, but it's really to govern you and what you want it to say. So the advice that we did receive from the consultant is included in your package tonight. Some of her overarching general feedback was to take the bylaw back a little bit and to the principle-based, to be just more broad and not as prescriptive, which makes it maybe a little bit easier to hold in place. So that, those important principles that you see in the bylaw of good faith, honesty, impartiality, professionalism, those are really at the heart of the bylaw. She also had a lot of specific recommendations around the complaint process, just adding more detail and clarity around that so it's clear when those things come forward, who needs to be notified and how those are dealt with, as well as adding an informal complaint process, which is in section 15 of the bylaw as well, so that, some things can be resolved informally and how that would be structured. The consultant has seen situations where there was no complaint filed, but council wanted an investigation, so suggested that we add that into the bylaw, so that has been included, as well as if there is a complaint, where that gets directed. So currently within the bylaw before you tonight, that would get directed directly to the town manager. I think the previous version of the bylaw said the mayor or deputy mayor. And, there is different municipalities have dealt with these differently, but she felt that this was a good recommendation in that, they wouldn't get lost, it would get dealt with timely, and the town manager could bring it to council to either further direct, or if it was a fairly simple one, that he could action that to be investigated further. Also included that was new was allowing the investigator to just end the investigation if it did appear to be malicious. So just starting that investigation if it was clear that there was no merit, being able to make that call under the bylaw rather than sort of completing a full report, bringing it back to council and having further discussion. And then the other piece was the sanctions section. So the bylaw, again, does apply to council and as well as council-appointed boards. And we had that sort of sectioned out, applying to the different areas. And so just under this new version, it's simplified. So really, if something were to happen, council would have the right to impose any sanctions. So it suggests some there, but also just speaks to, whatever council may wish to direct, or, the investigator, if that were to happen, may propose some as well. And then we knew when we brought this bylaw in place, and we had followed, I think, Airdrie's as a starting point, that the MGA speaks directly to the pecuniary interest, but not to conflict of interest, which can sometimes lead to conflicting situations where there may be a conflict of interest under the bylaw, but not a pecuniary interest under the act, which makes it difficult to navigate those situations. So that the conflict of interest has been removed based on that recommendation, so that there's not sort of two different levels, with the MGA being the ultimate level that we need to follow. And then finally, the last recommendation is around development. We had some very specific clauses within the bylaw, and at section 12, I didn't have that in the lead sheet, section 12 in the new bylaw, around, if there's development permits in play, what is appropriate conduct for council or not. So she did mention that may be something we want to remove, that's very specific. And so we're just looking for council's feedback tonight. We've left it in the bylaw, but looking for sort of further guidance if that's something you feel that we could remove, or if you're comfortable leaving it in as well. So this is for first reading tonight, so looking for any feedback, and then we would bring back for a second and third reading, depending on how much feedback there is, to get final approval on this bylaw. And that concludes, and I can answer any questions that council may have.
Okay. Thank you much for the presentation. Members of council, again, this is a code of conduct bylaw for council. as mentioned, that this is, we accepted it and adopted it in 2018, so this is the first kick at the cat, as we can say, well, probably not politically correct to say first kick at the cat, so we'll say first kick at the can, I guess. That we kind of mirrored our bylaw from some of the other municipalities that already had an existing bylaw. So now this is just kind of trying to fine tune it to make sure it kind of fits into our parameters, how we operate within the town of Stony Plain. I do like the fact that, that there's a little more alignment with the MGA, as mentioned by the general manager. So members of council, any questions of clarity and understanding? Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm referring to page 67 of our package, out of 111 pages. I know that it's listed in other places too, but this is where I made note of it. 4.9.9, when it talks about the town manager, it says the town manager may, and then it has number 1 and number 2. What I need to understand is that an either or, either number 1 or number 2, or is that the steps that will be taken? First number 1 and then number 2. Could I have some clarification on that, please?
Yeah, good question, Councilor Bennett. Go ahead.
Your worship, through the deputy mayor, it would be or. So when we talked this through, it would be that the town manager, you know, if it was a very serious concern and he wanted to get going on it right away, would give him the leeway to get that going. So if there wasn't a council meeting scheduled for a few weeks and received that, he could go and engage an investigator, which is the step 1. If he received the complaint and was unsure, you know, maybe this doesn't need an investigation, I really want council's feedback, he would bring it to council and then you would direct how to proceed.
Thank you. Anything else, Councilor Bennett? Okay, any other questions? Councilor Matthews?
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is with regards to page 53 of 111, and I need to scroll back. I have a little bit of a challenge with this. Sorry, I can't automatically change to my page, so I just have to scroll. So my first question is on so page 53 of 111, and it's with regards to 17-5-0, where it refers to investigations will be carried out in accordance with the following considerations. And B says only those individuals absolutely necessary to verify the complaint will be interviewed in order to maintain some degree of confidentiality of the complainant and the respondent to the greatest extent possible during the process. My question is with regards to some degree of confidentiality, that's pretty hard to define what that means. So what I had looked at is maybe another way to describe, because obviously you're trying to minimize, but we can't enforce confidentiality among individuals that are being interviewed. But instead to say, in order to maintain confidentiality of the complainant, so as opposed to describing some degree of confidentiality, say in order to maintain the confidentiality of the complainant and the respondent to the greatest extent possible during the process. I'm not sure if we need the word some degree in there, because I mean, what does some degree mean, right? We're just saying versus maintain confidentiality.
Okay. I'll bring that to administration. To me, it reads that we can't, as you mentioned, we can't guarantee confidentiality because once somebody asks that question, it's going to be out there. So I think to only interview the people that are necessary, that does kind of trying to contain it.
Yeah, definitely. You want to keep the absolute only those individuals absolutely necessary to verify the complaint will be interviewed in order to maintain confidentiality of the complainant and the respondent to the greatest extent possible. That says it. And it's just harder to define what some degree means. So that's just a comment. And then my question is with regards to the town manager's responsibilities. So that's 17-3-0. Does there need to be and 17-4, does there need to be an external investigator when there's a situation that requires an investigation, or is there ever a time when it can be investigated internally, for example?
Okay, that's a good question, because 17-.3.0 just has engaged services as a qualified external investigator.
Your worship, through to Councillor Matties, I would just say that it's written like that because of the, council is the board to administration. So I think it's very hard for us as administration to investigate some of these items, and that's why we would tend to refer to an external investigator on these.
So then in the other situation, if it was maybe a more minor issue, that you would just refer the complaint to council for direction, and then the council could decide if there was is that what you're saying, by 1 and 2, or by A and B?
Yes, that's correct. And I guess, the town manager may have more exposure to this than myself, but, it would be very difficult for us to investigate some of these items. It's often, I think that there's the informal piece added now, so, where you're trying to resolve it member to member or through that process, or else if it does turn into a formal investigation, it's likely that you want to bring somebody in that's an expert in that area and that can provide an unbiased opinion.
And also one of the changes, as mentioned by the general manager, is that the external investigator can stop an investigation once they've deemed that it was frivolous or just malicious, so that it doesn't have to carry out through the whole process. And so that's actually good as well. And I think the general manager mentioned that very, very well, is that because we are council and it's probably hard and unfair for staff to have an internal investigation. So I think I like that.
Your worship, if I can maybe just a couple quick comments too. I think there's at least two scenarios that would come to mind with those two clauses. So I would expect, or I would interpret that, the clause A would be used, frankly, in almost two situations. One where there would be an obvious and egregious and likely breach of the code of conduct. The town manager, the CAO, would be able to get that straight away to an investigator and so on and so forth. The other scenario that could be used is, something where it's almost the opposite of that. Some of the code of conduct investigations and ombudsmans and so on and so forth, actually reject a lot of complaints. And, just simply it ends right there. This is not an actual complaint. It could be handled through this or that or what have you. So, I would see that clause A kicking in almost the, I don't want to say the two extremes, but one that is almost maybe certainly obvious that it's that there's some issue there, and the event where it may be better handled some way else, but came through as as a code of conduct complaint.
Thank you. Anything else?
Yes, I just had one other question. It's on page 54 under 18-1-2, where it says that in terms of the sanctions, 18-1-2 is to limit compensation. And wonder what situation would you limit compensation? Would it be, for example, if the hours of the counselor were reduced, or the duties of the, how would that work?
Administration?
Your worship, through to Councillor Matties, when I think of this one, it's probably would be tied to Some of the others of, removal from a committee meeting, that there's compensation, those might be tied together where those could be. And I guess it's, depending on what's happened, this would be an option for council upon that investigation. And likely, I think that we did add that the investigator is to make recommendations around some of these pieces, around the sanctions, so that becomes easier for council to, get that advice, weigh it, and then either proceed with that or modify, so.
Thank you.
That's a good question, Councilor Matterson. Thank you for the explanation, because when you look at the list of sanctions, I'm glad that council's not choosing that, and that's recommended by the external investigator. Okay. Members of council, any other questions for clarity and understanding? Councilor Meyer, go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. I'm not sure if maybe I should wait till the next phase, but I'll try and make it a general question. If we turn to page 48, there's a section regarding expenditures, 7.1.2, avoid waste, abuse, and extravagance in the provision or use of public monies and resources. And I think we'd all agree that the sentiment behind that we can all agree with. My concern is in regards to the word extravagance. In my opinion, it's a judgment call as well as a moving target, depending on the economy, the perceived well-being of our citizens. What might have been an extravagant, or might have been reasonable 6 months ago, today might seem extravagant. And I'm just curious if administration thinks that could be flushed out a little bit better. Some guidelines, guidance on that. Because like I say, I have no problem with the sentiment of the point, but it does seem open to interpretation and a moving target.
Okay, so your concern is for on 7.1.2.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And you make a good point there. A good example is, for example, if we're at a conference, say, for example, in Toronto. So your lunch might cost you $25, but if you're in Edmonton, your lunch might cost you $15. So is that an abuse?
I mean, that would be a small example of,
Yes.
of what I mean.
Administration?
Your worship, through to Councillor Meyer. I mean, it's a good question and conversation. I guess, this was in the original version. And when I think about it, I think if there were a complaint to come forward on something like this, the investigator would have to look into exactly, the point you brought up of, is this reasonable based on sort of all the facts and circumstances in place? And as long as I think the counselor has shown good judgment in those, I think that the investigation would conclude that. And that is the challenge with this bylaw, is that, so I think it's a good discussion to have as to, does that make sense to have something so prescriptive in there, or is there something better, or removal? At the same time, you want to be transparent and, say, I know that you all want to do that and that you all are doing those things. So it's finding that right balance. So I guess not a perfect answer, but a good question.
So if I could just give an example. And I don't want anyone to read into it, but for example, someone might think that 6 months ago our twinning community, a trip to, say, Japan for our twinning community, might feel like a fairly we've always done that, so it would seem very reasonable. Now, maybe that might seem to some people unreasonable. And then a complaint coming forward based on something like that. So, I mean, I hear that we'd have an investigator who would make a judgment call on that. But if they say a citizen brought that type of concern forward, And our investigator found, no, it's actually quite reasonable that they do something that they've always done. I wonder if that would really satisfy the complaint. And if we tightened the phrasing of this up a little bit, we would avoid the perception that maybe the town would seem uncaring to somebody's concern or something like that.
Okay, those are good comments. You can make the motion to take it out later on if you want, or amend the motion if it comes before us.
And that would be in the next part of our, after we've asked questions of clarification.
Right now, we're asking for information and clarity, and after that, I'll accept the motion. From there, then we can debate it. And if that's what you don't want in there, then that's a motion to remove.
Well, sorry, Your Worship, it's not that I don't want it in there. I appreciate this this point. I just wonder if it's open to interpretation too much, if the word extravagance makes it a judgment call. I will sit here quietly and try and think of an option.
That's good, and then you can think about that. And when I read through this bylaw is the fact that if somebody does use that part of the bylaw to challenge some of our expenses, then as the town manager said, that can be brought up to council or then to a external investigator, and the investigator can say, well, this is part of town function that we do this. So no, it's not extra and abuse and waste and extravagant.
Okay.
Right, so that could be just handled very, very easily.
Yeah, and I'm kind of feeling what you're saying.
So I think that actually is a really good word there, and I'll give you an example. For example, we've all taken turns going to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities conferences. We're actually pretty cheap on our end because we usually send a mayor and 2 councillors to each and every FCM conference. So very well use of money. Where this can come into play is, for example, normally we book a single or double room, but if a councillor upgraded it to a penthouse suite, that is a clear code violation of that and very easily challenged. But if it was, for example, they got a king-size room because there's no other queens or doubles, that would not be. So that's kind of I see it and when I read it.
Yeah, I think I'm appreciating a little bit more what you're talking about now. I'm seeing it maybe as a way for people to take forward issues
Yes.
with policy as opposed to a more specific expense.
Right. No, I don't see that as that. I see it's definitely abuse of power, and that's exactly what it is. For if we fly somewhere and we typically fly passenger-style coach, but if a councillor or a mayor decides to want to go first class all the time, well, that's an abuse of power and not use of good money, right? That can be challenged on this policy, which is a clear definition. You can't challenge the fact that we're going to the conference because that's what we do as part of governance and everything else.
Right.
It's just how we get there.
Okay, I think I appreciate the point as is then with that explanation.
Thank you. That's a good question, Councillor Meyer. Councillor Loy?
Yes, thank you, for worship, and if I can just add on for a little bit more clarity. When I look at it, it says avoid waste and abuse of extravagance, pardon me. It would be, I'd like to just expand upon your example. You send the mayor and 2 councillors to any conference, and I know when I was in Vancouver, the prices of things were higher than what our general allowance approved. So we can prove that we weren't being extravagant. However, if all of a sudden the mayor and 2 councillors, if their expenses on a daily basis for meals are $100, and if I as the councillor was $250, that's extravagance, and I think that's what it's meant to be. It's governing us, and then they can say you are being extravagant. So from that, if Councillor Myers, if that helps you, I believe the wording is very good, and it just, yeah, I'm comfortable with you, Mayor. So for clarity.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of clarity and understanding on the bylaw? See, now, thank you very much, administration, for redlining the version so it's easier for us to see what the changes were, and then actually having clean versions so that we can see what it will look like in the future if it gets adopted by council. So members of council, I'm going to ask for a motion. Councillor Loy, you're next up.
Yes, Your Worship. That Town Council give first reading to bylaw 2673/G/20 to establish a code of conduct governing the conduct of council members, council committee members, and bodies established by council.
Thank you. With that being accepted, members of council, I'm going to open up the floor for questions and debate and comments on the proposed bylaw. Okay, Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering, we already have a code of conduct bylaw. So it sounds in this motion as if this is a brand-new motion. But we already have the bylaw, so shouldn't it be something about amending our bylaw?
No, I believe this is a new bylaw that will replace. So in the bylaw sheets, it will say, once this is, if this is approved, it repeals this bylaw. So it's just approve this one, this gets repealed.
And so sometimes, Mr. Mayor, we have another motion, and maybe that'll come after third reading, to repeal the first bylaw.
Okay. Actually, it's not required. Like, it's built into the bylaw that if this bylaw is accepted, the other bylaw is repealed.
Okay.
Okay. So if you want to verify that, that's on page 54 of 111 under 21.00 effective dates. So it says this bylaw comes in full force upon third reading, and then this shall be reviewed on the fourth year. So if it's adopted in 2020, then it'll be reviewed back in 2024. And item 3 is this bylaw 2583G/18 is hereby repealed. So once we adopt this, then it's automatic repealed, so we don't need a motion to repeal it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, any other questions, comments, debate? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Moving on to business items. We are looking at 9.1, the 2020 fiscal update. So go ahead, administrator staff.
Thank you, Worship. Again, I'll ask our General Manager of Corporate Services to speak to this.
Thank you to all of council. So we last updated you on the fiscal 2020 budget on June 22nd. COVID-19 does continue to play a bit of does impact on operations a little bit, with the golf course continuing to be the biggest variance from that spring budget that we had brought to you. And I'll just ask our Manager of Finance to walk you through the report tonight.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and Council. Uptake on the utility deferral program included 5% of residents and businesses. The number of utility accounts in arrears has returned to levels consistent with pre-COVID-19. In August, 42 shutoff notices were distributed. This is the first batch of shutoff notices that were distributed since February. Shutoff notices are distributed when utilities are over 3 months in arrears. Calculations regarding lost revenues on penalties remain the same as projected. The tax deferral program ended August 31st. Participation in the tax penalty deferral program equated to 8.6% of tax rolls. The amount of tax levy outstanding is slightly higher than this time in 2019 at 3.57% versus 3.3% in 2019. Tax arrear letters distributed this year totaled 552 versus 339 in the previous year. As proven by historical trends, we expect the outstanding levy to decrease now that the tax letters are delivered. We have continued to receive tax payments after the tax deadline. Due to payments received on utility and taxes, it is projected the town's line of credit will not require a draw in 2020, reducing the impact on the budget by an additional $25,000 for a total reduction of $50,000. At this point, administration has a better understanding of the impacts of COVID-19 in regards to facility revenue. Unfortunately, the impacts of COVID-19 are frequently changing. In the facility revenue projections, it is assumed revenue loss would be expected through August 31st. Although provincial guidelines regarding gatherings have relaxed, there have been significant amount of events disallowed or canceled. Through forecasts to the end of the year based on our current bookings, it is estimated an additional revenue loss of $75,000 will be realized. This brings the total revenue loss for facilities to $355,000. The golf course has had a very successful season thus far and is conservatively projected to break even, positively impacting the budget by $970,000, which is $200,000 higher than projected in June. We hope the season will continue revenue generation through October, as it will also continue to have costs to maintain the facility through December. Further details regarding the golf course operations will follow in Agenda Item 9.2 this evening. As a result of the projected surplus, administration has lifted the freeze on vacant positions, which will impact expenses by approximately $100,000 depending on hire dates. The change in reported estimated surplus is an additional $100,000 for a total of $845,000 as compared as to what was reported in June. The corporate planning process for 2021 through 2023 is well underway, and 2020 actual revenues and expenses are being continually monitored and reforecasted to the end of December. This concludes our presentation at this time. We would ask if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, members of council. There's a presentation that was done by administrative staff. Any questions of clarity and understanding? Councilor Lowry, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to administration. I understand that under the utility payment deferral, I've had a resident contact me in respect to concern of renters that they had in their property who also faced rent deferral, and they have since vacated the property, and the owner has now been left with a substantial bill. Does the town work one-on-one with individuals to come up with payment plans if they find these? Because especially given the times that we're in, and given that there was no shut-off notices not delivered during that time, it seems like we might have a few people who are stuck with some unexpected expenses.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Lowry. We would definitely be in contact, or those residents are encouraged to call. I know that those situations do occur. We can work with them absolutely. At this time, we don't have a penalty deferral further on that, so they would still have penalties every month when we run those penalties on whatever the outstanding balance is at that time. So if they choose to only pay 50% or whatever it is, if they're paying us a nominal amount every month, it would just follow through the same process as our policy applies the penalty.
Any other questions? Okay. As mentioned in the report that more people have been signing up for the tax installment payment plan. What percentage are we at now in terms of our overall residential assessment or commercial assessment?
I do have that number. It'll just take me a minute, I believe. Oh, sorry, it's right here on page 76 of the report. Approximately 708 ratepayers, or 8.6% of taxable rolls, are participated. Oh, sorry. My apologies. I'll have to get that number back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you. If I think that'd be just acceptable in an email back to council.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other questions for clarity and understanding? Okay, seeing that, I will ask Councillor Matties to make the motion, please.
That town council accept the 2020 fiscal update for information.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Matties. Members of council, I'll open up the floor for comments, questions, and debate. Maybe a question then, with the updated update on September 14th, we're right now looking at projecting of $845,000 surplus at the end of the year. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Worship.
Okay. In terms of $845,000, that's quite a bit of money. What can council do with that to help with some of the projects that were deferred or put on hold in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Your Worship, that question was debated and discussed too we had a corporate planning meeting this morning, our first, I guess I'd say our first corporate planning meeting of this season for the leadership team. We were just presented with similar numbers, and it would be our intent, Your Worship, to try to understand what projects are on now, what are being deferred, have that discussion, and we would intend to table those options prior to or during the corporate plan in November. So, we're still estimating that number at this point in time. We feel it's fairly accurate, but it could still move. And the notion, Your Worship, is to see how that impacts our 2021 corporate plan, 2022, that sort of thing, and bring those sorts of recommendations back to council at a later date. So,
okay. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions from council? Okay. See none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay. And that's been accepted for information. Thank you. So now moving on to 9.2 is the golf course operational update. Go ahead, administration.
Thanks, Your Worship. I believe our General Manager of Community and Protective Services, Carl Hill, will speak to this item.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. I just have a quick PowerPoint to summarize the report, as you do have the details in your package. So similar to the July report that we provided council from an operations, PowerPoint's virtually the same, just updated information, so you'll see some similarities. So this is a September version of the operational update for the golf course. So current operations, if you've been to the golf course, we've got 10-minute tee time, so that basically means every golf group is separated by 10 minutes. Pro Shop continues to be open with restrictions. Typically there's about 4, like the tee time of golfers basically that are permitted in the golf course to pay for their tee time or buy any provisions that they need for the course. The practice areas have opened since the last meeting we conducted with you, so there's a little bit more. Some public members are staying a little bit longer after their tee time to go to the putting green and also to the driving range and the chipping facility, which is opened. Of course, social distancing is in place during all of that. Restaurant is open upstairs, the 10th tee is open, and the beverage cart is going around the golf course. Also, continued is social distancing. High-touch items have been removed from the golf course, so there's no benches in some of the areas that people might touch more frequently. Pins have stayed in place. That's an industry standard at this point. We have changed how the ball is the relationship between the ball and the golfer getting the ball out of the cup. We've changed that a few times. Currently now it's called a tap it, so you basically turn a golf club over and you tap something in the bottom and your ball pops out. So it has the appearance of the ball going in the hole, so it doesn't have that nice crisp sound that golfers look for on occasion, but the ball still disappears rather than the pool noodle that we started with initially that had the majority of the ball still above the pin. So power carts, most people, I wouldn't say most people, most people are going 2 per cart. There's still on occasion people that are more comfortable with 1 per cart. So we are permitted to do 2 per cart at this point. And we have up the 15-minute arrival time to 25 minutes before tee time. And that's simply because the driving range is open and some people are taking advantage of the warm-up area that we do have available to them if they have a current booked tee time. If not, they can book the driving range at the course and spend 45 minutes on the particular mat that they've booked. So getting into some of the data that we provided at the last report, So we've added July and August here for rounds played. So you can see there's a sharp increase from 2019 to 2020. From a total, we're just under 30,000 rounds played May, June, July, and August in 2020. So 29,600. And compared to 18,200 in 2019. So you can probably do the math on that in terms of a sizable revenue difference between 2019 and 2020. So that's certainly a good item and a good news thing for the golf course. Driving range, it's one of those things where people enjoy going to or don't enjoy going to. You can see the numbers there. I think they're fairly stable with last year's numbers, even though we have some differences in the way that the driving range is considered, and we've also got a bit more separation, so less opportunity for the number of golfers to be on the driving range. But I think the numbers are, fairly close when you do the average over the two. It's probably pretty close, apart from May in 2020 when we weren't able to open the driving range. So something people enjoy, but with the reduced opportunity to be at the golf course 15 minutes and 25 minutes, some are just not going to the driving range at all before their round. Rain days, this is probably the biggest discrepancy in terms of a chart. As you can see, in 2019, we had 38 days of rain, which impacted certainly the operations at the golf course. And in 2020, we have had a total of 7. And of those 7 days, they didn't really wipe out the entire day. It was just a part of a day that was wiped out, versus 2019, where we saw substantial hours of golf course operation impacted by the rain and the levels. So very good for us with respect to a golf course operation from a rain perspective. Staffing, we've continued to maintain the 40% reduction in maintenance, pro shop 25% and back shop 50%. And of course, food and beverage, again, is a lease arrangement, so the 100% reduction is still maintained there. Jeff and his team continue to analyze the operations. We've got about 4 to 6 weeks left in the operation. Typically, depending on weather, the golf course, from a maximum can run to the mid to third week of October. Most of those rounds at that point are people that have memberships or are really diehard with respect to golf. Typically, a day like today, you're not seeing a lot of people choosing golf as the choice activity outdoors. So we do start to see a little bit of decline in tee times. However, the golf course remains fairly active, and the tee times remain in about that 200 golfers per day. So that's pretty good for this time of the year. We're looking at the staffing levels, whether or not we maintain some of this going back into 2021. We seem to be handling things fairly well with the addition of a couple extra maintenance people in the month of June. That certainly assisted us in being able to take care of the golf course as a whole. It was getting pretty challenging for the small crew. From a maintenance perspective, just from numbers, typically we're in that 14 to 16, including seasonals, and we're down to about 8, so 58, 8 staff. So we're certainly looking at that. It's certainly, we're happy with it. The superintendent's very happy with the level of maintenance that's out there. The big part is we don't have a lot of the sizable projects like the green replacement that takes a lot of staff time and takes more requirement from their perspective. It's basically a typical operation right now in terms of just cutting the green and doing some cleanup around the golf course. Overall, I think the maintenance at the golf course is probably at a higher level than it was last year, simply because there's not a lot of special projects that were being done at this point. Also looking at the membership green fee balance, as we mentioned in July, if you've got members, they have some tee time privilege and those types of things. So what is the right balance between getting green fee players out there, which is the people that are paying the full rate, and the memberships that can sometimes net those rounds down to a low number. So Definitely the guys have got a couple of scenarios there, and we're looking at that and looking forward to the 2021 season. And I know the guys at the golf course have been, 2020 has been a tough year for them in terms of having to navigate through COVID-19 and the changing environment. Definitely with the reduced staffing levels, we've asked people to do more. And I think they're looking forward to the end of the season and some of that wind down for sure. So, but that being said, they're very happy with the season. There's a lot more energy, positive energy around the golf course as a whole in terms of the way the season has gone. The comments that have coming back to the pro shop and Jeff and his team about the conditions, about the greens. There's just a lot of positivity around the golf course at this time. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation, and I'll ask for some questions of clear understanding from members of council. And again, I'll have to reiterate, I've received a few emails and some conversations from people that have played the course. It is in phenomenal shape, and they're very happy that they're able actually to golf this year. And then just the fact that we bit the bullet last year and changed all the greens, which again did not help us in terms of green play last year as well, is getting a lot of accolades in terms of how the greens are taken up this year. Members of council, Councillor Lloyd, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and through you to the General Manager. The pro shop itself, sir, there's still a fair amount of inventory in there, but there wasn't anything mentioned, or unless I missed it, Your Worship, about the sales in the pro shop and stuff like that. Could you make a comment on that? Maybe inventory was brought in less due to the COVID to start off with, but just the status of the pro shop, please, sir.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Loy. Pro shops are challenging. Often you're buying your merchandise in that first quarter of your operational year, and sometimes you're actually going in the fall before to see the new, as an example, Adidas's 2021 stock is already out. So not out for us to purchase, but out for the pros to go and look at and start to order and bring into the pro shop. So a lot of times in the fall, first part of the operating year, they're starting to secure their orders so that they can get them into the pro shop for the start of the season. A lot of that work was completed before COVID-19 hit, so we did have our inventory and then our merchandise purchased and committed to come into the shop. That being said, a lot of that merchandise can go back. We do have a program where if it's still remaining at the pro shop, especially through Adidas, we can send the majority of that back to Adidas because we haven't sold it. Sometimes we keep it because it allows us to open the pro shop the next year with some stock versus nothing, because sometimes your stock comes a little bit later after the start of the season, depending on how much merchandise is being ordered across the world, basically, like from Adidas, FootJoy, and some of the larger suppliers. So the majority of that will go back. Jeff is quite resourceful in terms of his networks. I know we sent a lot of stock, like our rental equipment as an example. He's got a deal that someone wanted to purchase all of our rental sets. So often he's making deals now so that when we run into the fall and when Terry's team comes over and asks us to count the inventory, they try to count as the least amount of items as possible. So some stuff we'll keep, hard goods, i.e. Balls, tees, those types of things where obviously that stuff's not going to change. So we also do Christmas sales, so that we need to have a little bit of merchandise in order to promote the golf course through that time of the season, which also helps us to promote our memberships to members too.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. A good answer.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Any other questions? Councillor Matties, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, to administration. Question with regards to your expected staffing for 2021. I realize you're leasing the food and beverage, but what do you see you will need for staffing? Is it, because we've reduced so much this year, do you have any idea of what your requirements are for next year?
Your Worship, through the Councillor Matties, thank you for the question. It's something that we continue to look at. In speaking with Jeff and his team, I think they're managing right now. I don't know that you'll see the numbers change a great deal. I think the backshop numbers is the wild card at this point, simply because if we can go back to a driving range that's as full as it typically is, that's more balls to pick up, that's more clean picks, that's a lot more energy and work that has to occur. So the backshop is basically related to the number of golfers on the golf course and the activities around the golf course. So some of the staffing levels will be dictated by how much more we might be permitted to do next year. That being said, we might be able to put rakes back in the bunkers, but will we? I'm not sure. Those are some of the debates that we're having with respect to. There's just things that you put on the golf course that you have to continue to maintain, or you have to go out and send people out to do things with. We're not sure that people have really missed them that much this year. So that will be the debate, and we'll see what the trends are. Typically, a lot of the courses in Edmonton will follow each other. So I think we'll be mindful of that, because we don't want to lose people simply because we don't have some of the same things that other golf courses have.
With regards to the three-hole junior golf course, that it was closed for the remainder of the year. There was other facilities that had opened up, the skate park and various other the playgrounds, etc. So in terms of guess if you could just remind me of the rationale for that, why that wasn't open when the rest of the things were open. Does that require additional staffing, or what were the issues?
Your worship, through to Councillor Matley, so just for clarity, because I may have missed the question, but you're talking about the junior golf, the three-hole golf course and the opening?
Golf course, that it was remained closed for the year while the rest of the golf course opened.
You bet. So your worship, through to Councillor Matthews, again, that was a decision that the staff made with respect to ensuring that the protocols for people coming on and off the property were maintained in terms of a lot of times with that junior course in the past, and it's the way that we functioned it, the parents would just pull into the parking lot, take their children over to that course, use it, jump back in the vehicle and go. So I think with the COVID provisions and protocols that were in place at this point, that was just another touch point that we didn't have the staff to maintain. They cut the grass to make sure that it didn't go too far. And next year they'll reevaluate whether or not that course can open again. So certainly it's not one that they've abandoned. It was just certainly a matter of the manpower wasn't there, or the staff were not there to properly operate that as it has been operated in the past.
Thank you. Any other questions for clarity and understanding? Okay. Just a reminder for our staff and for council members, I know it's kind of awkward to not turn your head to talk to somebody that you want to address the thing, but if you can just look straight ahead and just talk directly into your mics, because it is getting recorded and it is fed live through YouTube, and sometimes what we're saying is cutting in and out is because we're not using the mics properly. Thank you. 9.2, Councilor Lowry for the motion, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move that Town Council accept the golf course operational report as information.
Thank you very much. And with that being accepted for a motion, members of council, any comments for debate, questions, etc.? Okay. Seeing that there is none, maybe just one more question for the general manager. As the season winds down, I think we're projecting to be roughly break even is what the point is here. In terms of if there is a surplus on the golf course budget in terms of revenue and expenses, in the past, council has not yet, has never set up a reserve to deal with the surpluses or losses on the golf course, so that it can those surpluses can be used to offset losses in other years that are not as good. Is that something that council needs to talk about, or can we do that at year end, which is April?
Your Worship, members of council, timely question. We were just talking about financial planning all day today as an SLT group, and looking at the reserves, there actually is a golf course reserve, and I think I'd have to look at what that details, but simply it says golf course reserve. So I think from that perspective, there's one that does exist, and we might have to talk to the details of how a transfer may go into that reserve based on practice, because certainly that reserve right now currently within the operating budget, money is put into that reserve for future. And I'm not sure if there's enough flexibility within the reserve itself to say that a surplus could go in there. But I'm sure that that's probably possible, and we would just have to bring that back to council at a future date. As the CAO mentioned with respect to the corporate plan, I think some of those options would be tabled to council at a later date for sure, if there was a surplus at the golf course in 2020.
That's good. And thank you much. And I bring that question because we do, as municipality and members of council, created many reserves for capital. So I think the golf course reserve is for the capital replacement of the pro shop and the maintenance shed and all that stuff that eventually has to be replaced. But we've never addressed the operations of the golf course. So what happens to the operational surpluses that are generated from years that are good, and then what happens to the losses that are on the years that are bad? And usually, from my past experience, it has gone into just general revenue, which then, when there's a loss, it comes out of general revenue as well, which then residents don't see how the golf course is impacting or not impacting the actual tax rate. So having it separated might give us as council and members of our residents and the community a better understanding of how the golf course is run. Okay, with that, any more questions, comments? See none, I'll call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Moving on to 9.3, which is the new library project update. And go ahead, General Manager.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. I won't go into the details of the background in terms of how we got to a new library, and I'll just go right from where we are right now in terms of May 11th, council permitted or adopted and gave us an extra $1.8 million so that we could ensure that the library was completed as scheduled in 2020. So just continuing on with that schedule in terms of the work that's been completed since that meeting. So the construction project overall continues to take place. The Three Robins is still continuing to do and complete that project from the residential side. I think they're about 6 to 8 weeks behind schedule. Last time I spoke to them, they certainly were behind schedule, hoping to keep some pace and get ahead of that and bridge that time. However, looking at it, there's not any residential move-in at this point, so I think they're still a little bit behind with respect to their projected date of September for bringing people into the building, which is understandable with the year that we've had in 2020, but they're still moving along fairly good and at a very good pace. That being said, that did delay us a little bit in getting our contractor into the space to start constructing the library. So the RFP for construction, once we got the authorization for council for the extra $1.8 million, that week we actually put the RFP out, and we closed that, reviewed it, and we awarded it to Delnor Construction. And in late July, Delnor Construction mobilized to the site, completed their mobilization, and they started about mid-August with respect to active construction in the site. We have also done the RFP and award for the shelving and furniture. So that's some of the larger equipment that the library needs to operate, and also the shelving that would be located within the library. And that's contemporary office interiors. The majority of that equipment will be coming from the U.S., so it'll come on a big reefer and be loaded into the library when the library is ready to receive it. And we have to be very diligent with that timing because it does cost about $700 a day for the truck to sit with the equipment on it if we're not moving it in as we need. So that's a timing thing that we're paying close attention to. An RFP for shelving and furniture was awarded to Contemporary Office. The equipment RFP is, I believe, was closing in the last recent weeks. I have not had an update on who we awarded that to, but certainly that we received two tenders, and that's what we're expecting because there's very few people that actually specialize in that type of equipment. We are projecting, based on Delnor's project schedule, in December, they're projecting to be completed our space. Then we've got a bit of a move-in for the furniture, plus we've got the deficiency list and those types of things that would have to go through. So we are anticipating that the library would move over from its Forest Green location to the new location in January 2021. And the projected opening, we're saying February 2021. It could be earlier, depending on what happens. We're hoping it won't be later. Future for council, we're hoping that once things start to evolve, we get some drywall and paint and carpet and those types of things in the space, we would coordinate a tour for you to go over and actually physically look at the space. Right now, if you'd like to go over and look at wires and metal studs, it's in a really prime condition for that. But I don't think it permits you the opportunity to see what the space is going to look like and the beauty of the space until it gets some physical structure in there. So certainly in the next 6, 8, 12 weeks, we would be coordinating something with council to get them into the space to have a look at it. And then we anticipate once the library's moved over and some of the expenses are finalized, we can bring a final report back to council in Q1 of 2021, just outlining where we sit from a budget perspective, how the project went, and then plan a grand opening in coordination with the library in probably Q2, Q3 of 2021 once things have settled out there. At this point in time, the budget is looking good. We believe we're on track for meeting the budget that has been set for this project. Again, we're just I'm waiting for some details on that equipment RFP, but don't expect that to be outside the budget that we've identified for that particular piece of the project. Happy to answer any questions if you have any, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you much for the updates. Members of council, any questions for clarity or understanding on that presentation? Okay, seeing none. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Matthews.
I was waiting, hoping somebody else would ask a question first, but okay. My question is regarding the library. I've read the minutes from the library on August 17th at a regular council meeting, and in the minutes of the library, they talk about the 1.827 million as interim financing, and that fundraising efforts to assist in lowering project deficits over the months ahead. And then when we speak of it here, we talk about the increase in the 1.827 to the project budget, and that the fundraising campaign will assist in offsetting the increase to the budget. I'm just wondering if there's some clarity with regards to what our expectations are for the fundraising and how that will offset. And then secondly, truly, as I'm understanding more about the epidemic and the impact, and I guess how it is shown, there's many households, children without great technology for school, for other purposes, and I'm wondering, have we reevaluated technology at the library and the need for the technology in this community going forward?
That's actually probably a very good question to send to Deputy Mayor to bring to our next library meeting, which is tomorrow. No, Wednesday.
Would you repeat the question, please, Mr. Mayor?
Changing demographics.
What you just said.
I believe it was a changing demographics and with the pandemic and children's and residents' access to, technology. Is the library looking at changing what they're offering to kind of meet some of those needs? Is that paraphrasing right?
Yeah, so what has shown us is that there are many households that do not have technology, and the disparity between those who have and do not have, and the impacts on children in school, as well as just, other members of our community that do not have access to technology and would be able to use the library. Are we considering, increasing the technology that we have at the library? And then my second question was with regards to the fundraising, as to has the goal been adjusted, and what would we expect would go back to reduce the deficit? And then also the other part of it was, is some of it still needed for increased technology in the community?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When it comes to the technology, I have to say we haven't really discussed that. There's lots of things coming that, you know, weren't proposed at the beginning of this project. So that technology update to meet the demanding needs of the future has not been on our discussion. We do have a meeting on Wednesday evening, and I'll bring that up. As for the fundraising, we had a workshop in, I'd like to say July or August, with our entire board and the campaign manager that we've hired. And so it's a well thought out process, and it is the intention of the library board to repay that 1.8, I believe it is, million, fully. So that is our goal and that is our intention. It's a well laid out schedule and process. I'll be able to update council a little bit more after our meeting on Wednesday night. But it's ongoing and it's a goal that we'll meet.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions for clarity and understanding before we accept the motion, that we can debate it further? No, other question. Councilor Pletchko, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and I'll redirect that question to administration, to CAPS, to answer that question of the 1.287 million. You talk about it as an increase in a budget where it was actually listed as something different in a different meeting. And can you address the two separations between the two?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Pletchko, I'm just going to try and get some clarity on that. So at May 11th, we brought forward the project overall, so from a project perspective and the overall budget, and identified to council that there was a 1.8 million basically deficit to complete the project. So am I going in the right direction for you? Yeah. So the report that we brought back to was in that at May 11th was also identified that the library was starting up a fundraising campaign, and their goal was to assist us with that. So we identified that there was a risk in terms of, and laid out some options with respect to, we could wait for the library to raise the money and we could move on with the project from that perspective. Or we could fund it through the town through MSI dollars that had not been spent, and continue to allow the project to move forward under the timelines. So we did point out some risks related to the library paying back that 1.82 million. At that point, we did not, council did not deem it necessary for us to have an agreement with the library for them to pay it back. That was an expectation that council had with them, understood that they were motivated to try and bridge as much as possible of that 1.27 back to the town of Stony Plain when they were able to get their campaign going, and as the impacts of COVID-19 in the community were able to support that fundraising endeavor. So I'm hoping that answered your question. If not, certainly can provide more information if not.
I'm just wondering, through you, Your Worship, to community. I'm just wondering if the word interim was misrepresented or misunderstood in the initial conversations that we had.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Pletchko, certainly I think the principle of the 1.8 million or the increased budget was to allow the project to continue and the project to be completed. So certainly interchanging interim budget, loan, those types of words with respect to that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the goal was to have council authorize an increase in the overall project budget, with an understanding that the Stony Plain Library Board would be doing some fundraising and hope that we would get that increased funding that was supported from council back to some degree. So I think that's the best I can probably provide in terms of that. Certainly we've used some terms, and I don't have the May 11th report in front of me to say in certainty what terms or language we used in that report. But do recall that this $1.8 million was added to the overall project budget so that we can complete it with the expectation that, or anticipation, understanding that the library would provide some dollars back to the town of Stony Plain, and we have yet to see what that would be in the future. It could be the full amount, as Councillor Bennett has indicated. It might be more. It certainly might be less. So I think there's 3 scenarios there that have to play out once that campaign starts going and the momentum starts to get there.
So just one more thing for clarity. So help me to understand a little bit further. When we talked about it being interim, my understanding of interim was we were lending the library money. Yes, I understand there was some perception that we may or may not get all of it back at the time. But was that not separate from the overall 3 point? Okay. You're shaking your head, so you're answering my question then. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Your Worship, just to clarify, and thank you, I understand now. We basically increased the budget by $1.8 million. So the overall project, just to use round numbers, if when we anticipated this project, when we first started it, we projected it at 3.6. When we went through the detailed design came back and told us, in fact, that it was 5.2 or 5.4, right? So we basically came back and said, hey, the project is 5.4. We need an additional 1.8 to meet the 5.4 required to complete the project. The timing of everything with respect to the way that we positioned and went through that project, the library starting their fundraising campaign, it's changed the complexity or how we would typically handle this. As we explained or shared on May 11th, typically this would be a project that we announce as a priority. We'd go and get the detailed design done and come back to council with this project's going to cost you $5.4 million, and then you get to debate the 5.4. At the time of which we approved the project, with the information that we had, the best information we had at that time, 3.6 was the estimated project value. So it wasn't until we did the detailed design on the actual space, and it also wasn't until we got some more clarity from 3 Robins with respect to the size of the space and just the physical of the space. When we initially signed the 3.6 or came up with that project, it was based on a completely different set of specifications related to the 14,000 square feet. And this one's 14,800. So a few things changed from the day that we got the approval for 3.6 to May 11th, 2020, when we brought the revised budget back. So probably the easiest way to think about this is the budget required a revision. We got some approval from council to revise the budget, and the new budget we're working with is 5.4 for the overall project, with an understanding that at some point in the future, some money may come back from a fundraising campaign that the library is undertaking.
Thank you for your clarity.
Thank you. Any questions of clarity and understanding? Okay, seeing none. 9.4, Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Town Council accept the new municipal library project update report for information.
Okay, thank you. Members of Council, any comments, questions, and et cetera for debate? Okay. I do have a question maybe just to library board representative and maybe to administrative staff. I had a chance to tour the wires and the steel frames with a hard hat and going through that. I was under the impression that there would be an access to the library from the building, 3 Robins building itself, as one of the components of the 3 Robins project was volunteerism. And a lot of the residents that would be taking up a suite in there were choosing to volunteer at the library. There is, looks like there could have been a door planned from the main entrance of Three Robins, but that has been sealed. So all volunteers would have to go out the doors, go around the corner to access the library, which is not bad, especially in the summer, in the spring, maybe in the fall, but very hazardous in the wintertime. So my question is, can we work with Three Robins to make access, even to have a door there that is key locked, so that only residents can come through that door? So that our residents that will be living there, that are choosing to volunteer at the library to reduce their rent, do not have to go outside, especially in the wintertime. And we know we live in Alberta, and the winter can be 2 months or it can be 6 months long.
Your worship, members of council, so my understanding, and I have to confirm from a drawing perspective, but the elevator was supposed to open up into our space as our conversation with Three Robins was the potential for the library to use their program space on the second floor also, because they have craft rooms and those types of things on the second floor. And certainly there was provisions for a door that would be locked and could be accessible and open either by the library staff or Three Robins staff for that interaction as you're speaking. So would have to go back and look at the detailed drawings that I have not in some time and see if that's not been captured. But certainly the elevator was one that down to the bottom floor, and there was an access point into the library from the bottom floor of the elevator was in the original designs.
Thank you. If you can provide us an update on that, there is some concerns from individuals that are looking to moving into the Three Robins project. And as you mentioned, it is still open space, so it is easier to rectify now than it is after it's completed. Right. Any other questions or comments? Discussion for, go ahead, Councillor Matties.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I just have one comment, first of all, with regards to the disparity between the 3.6 million and the 5.4 million for the project budget. I understand that's been explained well by administration tonight and also previously. The point, though, is that generally speaking, I mean, that's a unique situation, but normally we are more in line with budget and when it comes to infrastructure and facilities, et cetera. So just a note on that regard, and that I do appreciate the library's attempt to provide funding in support of that moving forward. I do have one other question, though, with just let me think what it was. Oh, yes, it was on parking. I had a resident, business owner in the vicinity and talked about all the businesses in that direct area. So whether that is the liquor store or the physiotherapy and the library and the lawyer and all the rest of it. And I walked through there a short while ago. And first of all, the parking behind Three Robins, the stalls are so small, I don't know if you just get a bug in there, never mind a truck or something like that. So small parking. Next thing is if at the library nowadays, people stop there, pick up their books quickly because they've ordered online and then leave the library. So there is a need for a few spaces, I would believe, and I think that would provide for, you know, proper use or current use of the library for somebody to just be able to pick up and know that there's some parking spaces available. The other point is a question regarding parking in general with downtown, that I know that we would like to transition to a more walking environment or other forms of transportation. But at the same time, looking at the parking on the north end of the downtown area, if we could look at the parking lot in front of the new Folkestone that's owned by Imperial Oil, if we could fix it up and then maybe put some additional benches and stuff like that, so it's a nice area, so that people would probably tend to go there, park there, maybe, sit there, whatever. But also on the other end of town, is there space close to the library where we would be able to have more accessible parking?
Okay, that's good comments. Maybe administrative staff can look at some parking options down there. But in terms of limited or timed parking, that'll definitely be an administrative staff function once we get the library open and see how it runs first to see if that is warranted. So I think in terms of parking downtown, the study does show that we do have enough parking downtown. The problem is that employees of our businesses are parking on those spots. Before we created a parking bylaw, businesses did not have to provide parking for their employees, and that's one of the problems that we got into with the downtown area, is that a lot of the existing businesses did not provide adequate parking for their own employees, and that's becoming a problem. So the town Stony Plain has been in the process of acquiring lands and changing a few areas into parking lots. Definitely one is right behind us here. There's a vacant lot here that is parking in town. There is one right here now that we took care of. We do have a lease with, is it Esso? That's behind the feed mill with all that. And he made a good comment about having the old Danny site as a possibility as well. Maybe the staff can look into that. Is there any sites on the south side of Main Street that has an ability for us to lease?
Your Worship, certainly, I can make a few comments on this one. Yeah, there's a former church site sort of located at the south end of our Main Street that we could look at down the road. Your Worship, I think there's a good opportunity. When that library opens, when the rest of the downtown project is complete and opens, we've done what I've frankly, Your Worship, would say to you and to council. We've done the best we can on the planning side for parking. Now as those projects wind down or open up or whatever you want to call them, we'll have to keep our eyes and ears open over there to see what happens in the practical reality. At this point in time, we've done the planning, we've designed and so on and so forth. Over the course of probably the next 2 or 3 years, we'll see, the results of that planning, how it works, how it doesn't work. And we just need to remain, somewhat flexible as to rules, regulations, restrictions, so on and so forth, over the course of the next couple of years as it relates to the parking down there.
Mm-hmm. And that's good comments, Town Manager. And just to remind Town Council and the members of residents that are watching is when the downtown's all redone, Main Street is supposed to be a 2-hour parking zones, which then allows customers to come in and leave and do what they need to do. The avenue sides where we've increased that's the north side to be angle parking, I believe. So which has increased the number of parking stalls we have in downtown, and those areas are supposed to be designated 3-hour parking, again, to increase the traffic flow. So again, that will hopefully push our business owners and their employees a little bit further away, which they should be a little bit further away, and they should be walking the 2 blocks to get back to work so that it leaves spaces for the customers to come in and out.
Just to follow up with that, so do we have spaces right now, so for example at Cosmos that has takeout pizza for people to, Cosmic, that has like a takeout spot where they can drive in, pick up their pizza, and it's always available? Do we have those types of spots? And then particularly looking at the library, I have to ask the representative if she feels that was needed, but I certainly go there and drop off, pick up my book quickly, and I'm out of there.
Yep, and I think that's a good comment that you made, and as the town manager says, we have to wait until the project is completed, the library is open to see how the actual functionality works. We can design everything on paper, and it seems like it's going to work well, but in actuality it doesn't. So again, those are well noted. Being a downtown business owner myself, I deal with that each and every day with my clients, and then also with my employees, trying to get them to park where they're supposed to park, so that it leaves ample room for our customers. And even now with construction right in front of my business, that's also been a constant education process to my customers, where they can park and how they can get access to my thing until the downtown is done. And from there, as the town manager says, let it play out for a little bit so we can see how the actual ebb and flow works for the parking. And then if it needs to be done, then we can, like I said, it's an administrative function. They can make those adjustments. If it needs to be a 10-minute parking spot in front of Cosmo or 10-minute parking spot into a liquor store, whatever that is going to be done, that staff will have that analysis, and then they'll make those adjustments when required. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. See none, I will call the question. All in favor for information? Okay. And that is carried. Move on to 9.4. Well, actually, before we go, let's call a quick recess, comfort recess. People are nodding at me, so let's take a 10-minute recess and we'll be back.
computer froze.
All right.
It's not a computer freeze.
All right, council, we are back. And moving on with our agenda item is number 9.4 is the information on taxation of vacant lands. So go ahead, administration, town manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will just ask our General Manager of Corporate Services to speak to this item.
Thank you to all of council. So as a reminder, you did direct us to bring back a policy around the taxation of vacant lands back in the corporate plan of November of last year. And so we have this in front of you tonight as information. So if there's questions, we're more than happy to work through it with you. And then we'll bring it back for a decision after the discussion tonight. But just really information and helping you understand what we've come up with in researching this policy a little bit more. So background included within your package tonight is obviously there's a number of different reasons of why vacant lands are held within the town. And, you know, we see all these within the town of Stony Plain, whether it's remnant parcels or parcels with the physical limitations that are hard to develop, as well as, you know, parcels being held for different reasons by different developers, as well as lands that we hold, which you got a report on recently as well. We did find two other policies within Alberta, which we've quickly summarized for you, that have put these into place, being St. Albert and Chestermere, and I've used those as a starting point to present something for you tonight. So the key policy decisions included in the proposal is that it really mirrored St. Albert on this one, that 7 years after the subdivision, we would start applying a vacant taxation rate at a higher rate, being 125% higher than the normal municipal rate. And we have put in front of you that it would apply to both the residential and the non-residential lands. Some key exclusions from the policy on these lands are that if the property is not fully serviced or developable, we would not apply that rate. And this one, you know, we spent a lot of time on analyzing this internally, and it was one of the harder pieces of the policy to put in place because there's a bit of discretion there. And the policy does give that discretion to manager of finance, who has our assessor working with her. And that's, you know, they would assess it as a subclass, and that's how that would come into play. So the discretion would lie there in the proposed policy tonight. It also excludes properties where, you know, either a resident or a business has bought two lots and is really using them together. So there were a number of those that we identified as well. And so we would not apply that higher tax rate to those parcels, and those have been excluded from the analysis tonight. Farmland, obviously, not developed, you know, that could come into play in future years, but excluded at this point. I guess come in as it develops. And then, you know, just flat out exclusion if there's any building or improvement, this would not apply to those lands. So this is the chart that we included in your package tonight. When we looked at all those lots, there was 464 vacant lots that we identified, and then applying the 7 years to that from subdivision brought it down to 199,000, and this would be if we decided to put the policy into play for next year, being 2021. So the impact on that, you can see it's, you know, fairly split between residential and non-residential, and would result in additional taxation revenue to the town of about $100,000. So as I said, you know, it's here for discussion tonight, and there's a number of different policy options that we could adjust based on council feedback. One being that 7-year timeline after the subdivision. That could be increased to 10 years. It could be decreased to 5 years. That's really at council's discretion. We used the St. Albert as being that 7-year sort of mid-year point that, you know, you would expect things to be developing after that time frame. The rate could also be adjusted either higher or lower from that 125% of the normal municipal rate. And as you can see, Chestermere has gone a little bit higher than that. They also, I think, maybe offer some more incentives on the developer side, so they kind of do that carrot and stick approach. So something, just a different model that they've put into place. The property type, as I said, it applies in the proposed policy to both residential and non-residential. You could really target that on just one side or the other. That could be adjusted. And the other thing we talked about internally was just the boundaries. So right now, we've applied the policy to the whole town boundary, but we do have an infill policy in place that, more focuses on that sort of old town area. And it could be narrowed to that area, which obviously reduces the taxation revenue. And then just the time frame, I mean, like any policy, council can choose of when that would come into play, whether it be next year, the year after, stage it somehow, or just decide not, that this policy is not what they were expecting and decide to stay status quo. So that's a really brief presentation. I know there was a lot of information in the lead sheet, but I think I'll leave it to that and we can just answer any questions that council may have for further clarity on this one.
Okay. Thank you very much, members of council. Any questions for understanding clarity on that presentation? Go ahead, Councillor Loy.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And no, my computer didn't freeze, but it's not working right now. But so I can't refer to which page, but if the director can bring up again with your 4 points there where it says 125% can increase or decrease. 1.25. Yes, that one right there. When we look at the rate, is that an average of municipalities that are similar to ours that would be operating at 1.25? And do you have any examples? Well, this is the second question of that through you, Your Worship, too. What are some of the maximums? Do they hit 130, 135, 140? Just for clarity, Your Worship, I'd like to have an idea.
Okay.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Loy. So the 125% was based on what City of St. Albert had done, just because they're a relatively close neighbor. The City of Chestermere on their residential has gone 150%, and on the non-residential 350%.
Oh.
And I'm not very familiar with sort of what Chestermere's history is or why they've done some of that, but those were the comparisons that we could find within Alberta.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I just have one further comment. During my time on council, we've really prided ourselves in keeping a respectable or a decent tax rate, and at the same time maintaining expenses and our ratio in population, to the number of employees. So just have somebody say 300% is just absolutely crazy, really. But I think it's an avenue that should be open to us to look at, bearing in mind, circumstances. So it's just a comment, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any other questions for clarity and understanding? Councillor Mattis, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have, first of all, a question of clarity with regards to the numbers that are here. And the reason that I started doing the calculations is because I wanted to compare what 1.5% or 150% would look like as well. So as I did that, and I'm calculating, so for example, if I take the residential and the number of applicable vacant lots last developed, so that's the number we're looking at, the 155, right, as to who this would apply to. So then if you multiply that by the difference between, so if we're looking at 125%, the difference between the proposed vacant rate and the 2020 rate, then and you multiply, so the difference of those two numbers, and then you multiply by the 177,000, the average residential lot, and then you, and then you are multiplying that by the 155 lots. Is that what you've done? Okay, so can you help me understand, because I can't get the numbers, even if I took the 221, so if you could help me out. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, through your worship, to Councillor Matties. So what was used in, that's not pictured here, is the actual assessment of those lots that were identified on the map. And so it wasn't the average that was used, it was the actual assessment. And so you did also ask in regards to what 1.5 would be, or 150%, and that would equate to $203,927.
Okay, sounds great. So, and the reason that I feel that's really important is that if we were doing any kind of an offset to incent developers to, or owners to build things that are in accordance with our strategic plan, it would be nice to know how much, what we're looking for in terms of the numbers that we would receive for increased revenue, that maybe we could use to offset some of the loss in revenue if we're trying to do some incentive program. And that's exactly what the town of Chester, city of Chestermere, has done. Having said that, their numbers are large in terms of the 350%, et cetera, and I'm not sure how that's working, but I do like the fact that they are going on one end. We want to, we want to ensure that there isn't a whole lot of vacant lands just sitting there for speculation, but at the same time, we want to incent people to work towards our strategy to achieve our goals. So, for example, if that's increasing higher density downtown through apartment blocks, those types of things. So, can you speak to that in terms of how you would recommend based on the 125 or 150% relative to an incentive program that we could be utilizing to, basically increase the development in our community that meets our density requirements?
Thank you.
I guess I'll speak to that. There's a couple thoughts there that crossed my mind, or I would comment on as through you, Your Worship, that Councillor Matties was raising. And again, I'll just bring these up as comments or thoughts, not necessarily direct answers. In one way, a policy that is in front of council tonight could be considered an incentive policy. It's framed differently. It's framed in the opposite in that you don't get a break for developing, but you certainly, are incentivized by potential cost for not developing land that is, or not building on, or not going forward with land. So that's clearly able to be built on. So that's one side of it, or one comment I would make there. When it comes to on the incentive sides, yeah, there's numerous ways to go at that. We have some, I think it was mentioned in the PowerPoint, infill policy that provides some incentive directly for to encourage or encourage growth or encourage development in certain areas. The typical one again is a sort of new growth tax abatement program. Those are, I don't know if they're incredibly common in Alberta, but they are out there. And those are simply it's a tax holiday for any new growth, and they can be targeted, they can be blanketed, so on and so forth. Your Worship, I'm just going to stop there to see if I was on the right track as to the line of question or comment. But those are a couple other thoughts I would put into the mix on incentive versus disincentive of this policy.
Okay, that's good comments. Council Matters, anything else to add?
A comment that it would be nice, like, this is good for information, but it brings additional questions for me as a counselor to meet the needs of our community. I'm not clear exactly what our needs are for, say, affordable or accessible housing for communities. So, for example, 2- and 3-bedroom apartments that we could rent at a reasonable price for a family in the downtown area. If that would be a strategic area that we'd want to work at, that we want to have a program that maybe incents a developer to work on those types of things. And that's exactly, I've looked at Chestermere, actually read the same type of development incentive, and that is in Kelowna as well, for their urban center, city center, because they need to increase the density, and they're talking about the infrastructure costs of building out as opposed to keeping in the core. So that's Kelowna, but Chestermere, again, combined vacant land tax at 1.5% with offset tax break for development that aligns with their strategic priorities. So I'd like to see a bigger picture.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Matties. And then definitely that was something that Council tackled with the infill policy. As the infill policy first started, it was only for commercial and industrial lots. And as we noticed that, again, as you mentioned, trying to densify and go up, not out, the high-density residential were also added to the infill policy to allow, I guess, owners of those parcels to be able to apply for more expedient processing of the permits, and also then the town manager has the option to waive some fees, and then also then they can come to council to defer some offset levies that can be done. So if you feel that it needs to be stronger, definitely that would be a motion to council to debate and then to decide if you want to do that as well. So definitely a good point. Thank you. Councilor Fletchko?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, through to administration. When I reviewed this, I thought it was very unique in the way it was presented, because you could look at it two ways. It can be either a deferral or an incentive. My question is, though, how do we defer any of the properties that are here from just flipping? So I see this as an easy way to take it from ABC company and putting it into a land co company, which then takes it away from the 7 years, and it can still be owned by the same developer. Is there a way to prevent that through what I read here? Did I miss that portion of how we would prevent that?
Councillor Fletchko, yes, there is. There's a clause in there that says even if it changes hands, it does not reset the clock.
Where did you see that?
I read it. I didn't mark the page because I read it, but
It's 104, 6.8 C.
okay, thank you. I knew I read it, and when you brought it up, it's like, I remember that because that was the question I had as well until it got answered. Okay. Okay, any other questions for clarity and understanding? Okay, see none. Councillor Meyer for the motion, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council accept the taxation on vacant lands report for information.
Okay. Members of Council, we've had a report. We've had a couple questions of clarity and understanding. Questions, comments, and debate on the motion. Councillor Bennett, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand that this is a report for information. So what I have are just some things that have occurred to me. I remember very well when this came before council, and I thought it was a great idea. That was about a year ago, I think you said. A year ago, that looked like a fairly good idea, but things have changed in the past year. I think looking to punish landowners at this time is probably not the direction to go. In the past, we did do the infill policy, And when I walk around this town, I see so much development on those infill properties. Some of those properties that have remained vacant for years and years and years are now being developed. I think it's partly, probably mostly, because of that infill policy and making that land available for commercial properties. A lot of times when we think about this, we think, oh, they've got to build. Well, you know, business owners probably know their businesses. In fact, they do, way better than we do. And so they are building what they see the need is. And to have an infill policy like we have is just an incentive for them to do it. Putting a taxation on vacant lands, I think, is the wrong way to go on this. My other thought on this was, you know, I don't mind the vacant land. In fact, if I had, you know, if our whole town was, and I'm looking at the map, if every single part of that was filled with some residential or commercial, that's, you know, it would look more like a city and just be, I like some of the green spaces. I like having vacant properties. What I don't like is when they are left and not taken care of. So in my mind, what might be more of a strategy is for us to take the nuisance bylaws for these vacant lands and enforce that. Even planting grass or something on those properties make them much, much more attractive, and I think benefit the whole appearance of the town much better than building for building's sake. One of the things that I know has happened in the past is that people who own property, especially in Old Town, and they think about building a new home or a home for investment, then they get whacked with the off-site levies because those properties have never been taxed properly, and that's what puts them off. So if we're going to look at and incentivizing residents or people to build in Old Town, maybe that's the strategy we need to look at, is in, I don't know, reducing a bit of those off-site levies. And I'm probably not saying it properly. It's probably not an off-site levy, but you know what I mean, Mr. Mayor, when I say the taxes have not been paid in Old Town because they were developed before we had off-site levies. So I think that, you know, before we go ahead and do anything with this motion, except it for information, we need a strategy. What Councillor Matties was talking about, if we want to incentivize builders to build for affordable housing, then that's a strategy that we need to look at. And so I don't think at this point, taxation on vacant lands is the answer for our needs.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor, for your comments. And again, this is a motion to accept for information. There is no motion to accept this as a bylaw of the town of Stony Plain, which you fully made your comments. So excellent. And I just want to address the one comment about offsite levies. You're absolutely correct. It is not Old Town that has not paid offsite levies. It is those people that have not yet tied into our services, which we have not charged them offsite levies. And once they decide to expand, subdivide their lots to connect to our services, they have to pay for that service connection, which is responsible of everybody that uses those services. So it's not a negative, it's actually a positive that they have to pay offset levies, because that's the fair way of doing it for somebody to subdivide their lot and to connect to municipal services. Okay, any other questions? I saw the hands up. So, Councillor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Two things that I've got to say, just general comments on it is, I think every meter of road, sewer, water lines, storm lines, trails, sidewalks has a certain cost to maintain. And when we have undeveloped lots that sit for extenuating periods of time, essentially what ends up happening is the lots that have been developed end up cross-subsidizing those lots that have not been developed. And so it's a bit of an unfair playing field when you have the same lot of land in the town and one is paying one amount to the town and one is paying a significantly lower amount to the town. I think 7 years is a large period of time for opportunity to develop those lands, and leaving that land vacant and not necessarily developing that definitely does not necessarily serve the community and the houses and the other developments around that property, because it is not contributing equally across the board as those other properties are. So I do think that this policy actually has great merit. I do think it helps to ensure that, the costs associated with our development and the costs associated with operating the town are spread as equally as possible across the residents. The one thing that I do want to bring up, though, is, there are ways to use vacant lots that aren't necessarily development. And I do think it would be prudent, and again, as we kind of talk around policy and whether these go hand in hand or whether it's something that follows, one huge thing that you hear about a lot is the availability of land for urban agriculture. And we have many areas in our town that the lots themselves, once developed, may not necessarily have a lot of room on them for creating a small community garden or even a sustainable home garden. However, if there are vacant lands in the subdivision, those lands could potentially be used for something like that. And so I'd be interested to see as time goes on if policies were developed in where there would be opportunities where people would not have the vacant land tax applied should they allow their land to be used in an alternative manner. So for instance, if we had an empty lot or a vacant lot in Old Town that the landowner agreed to allow the existing landowners to garden on and use that, they would then revert back to the regular taxation rate instead of paying the vacant tax rate. So I think there's interesting opportunities in which we can look at different policies that will help utilize those lots, even if it doesn't mean that those lots get developed, and avoid having any potential additional taxes increased onto those lots. However, I do think the policy holds great merit. I think that we will see a lot more of these policies as time moves forward, because gone are the days of having very, very large development. We're not going to see the subdivisions that we've had before. And unfortunately, we're stuck in several areas of our community right now where we have fully developed, fully serviced areas that the land has been completely stripped and is literally sitting as barren land that nobody is doing anything with because there isn't incentive to, and I don't think that incentive is providing a cheaper way for them to develop. I think that incentive is to make sure that the town is being made to maintain those systems and the development that have been put in place. And so we need to be able to collect the appropriate taxation off of those properties in order to sustain the repair and maintenance on the systems that we have in place and on the infrastructure that we have in place. So I'm really glad to see this come forward. I think there's a lot of things that we can look at as we move forward, whether it's in a different policy that does play off this or whether it's within this policy. I'm not quite sure of that yet. However, I appreciate the work that's gone into this to date, and I look forward to seeing it come back to us for debate and decision.
Councillor Matties?
Thank you. I so appreciate the good discussion on this subject, and I find myself very much concurring to. I do like this policy because again, equity in terms of the contribution to our infrastructure, et cetera, and maybe an incentive to develop. But more importantly than that is continuing on with looking at our strategic planning for what our priorities are for commercial and residential development, and ensuring that we know what our priorities are, and then looking maybe at this again in February next year with in tandem with maybe other potential incentives that we could towards those strategies. So question for you is when will this be coming back, and would we be able to expand a little bit on it?
Okay. So I guess once we accept the information, if something wants, I don't know, the motion does not, the previous motion did not say to bring it back for approval, it just says bring information back.
Your
So-
worship, just for clarity, it was administration's intent that this would be received for information this evening and that it would be back in the chambers, I believe, September 28th for debate and, for debate. And
Okay. So it'll be for debate, and then when will it come back?
well, on the 28th, your worship, we would be seeking direction. So that, we would be looking for, a yes, no, or go back and change something, sort of debate. There's some timelines to get it in, if it, depending on what council ultimately decides, there's timelines to have it in place in the 2021 tax year, I believe, that we would look to meet. Your worship, if I could provide maybe a bit of comment, this has been a good dialogue, excuse me, with council, and there were some good questions and thoughts brought up. Some are frankly bigger than the policy that are in front of you. If this policy forms some aspect of that go forward, then my recommendation would be to debate it on the 28th. And if council sees fit, then put it into place. There's some good follow-up or add-on or build-to type policies and strategies. But if you're feeling confident in some of those moving along, or you want to get confident in those moving along, then this is a starting point to do so.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, comments regarding the motion? Councillor Bennett?
So just to be clear, this report will come back on the 28th for discussion and approval?
No,
Is that
so
what
this
I'm hearing?
report is getting accepted for information tonight.
Yeah.
And then on the 28th is coming back as a policy for us to debate.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I just have to say that I think at this point, I probably wouldn't be in favor of that policy.
You can say that for
And
the
I
28th.
know I'm just one vote, but I think that for the benefit of our community, we've brought up some points tonight that could use a little bit more strategy and could use a little bit more in-depth thinking about how we can use those vacant lots rather than just accept this as taxation or not. So I know, as I said, I'm just one vote, but I just think this is such an opportunity for us to really develop something that might be a leadership position in our region. And I'd hate to see it just come down to policy in 2 weeks.
And understood, Deputy Mayor, but that is not the debate. The debate is to accept for information. So on the 28th, you have the ample opportunity to bring those comments back forward and to change the rest of council's mind.
Okay.
Okay? Any other questions? Councilor Loy.
Yes, briefly, Your Worship. I agree, this is for information. I think the deputy mayor is basically saying that does it have to come back so quickly in 2 weeks? If we had 3 weeks, if we had a month, does that better serve? The CAO mentioned that date. None of us mentioned that date. I think there may be a better comfort zone if it came back, because there is a myriad of suggestions and ideas that can go along with this, and haste makes waste, and so.
So, Councilor Loy, I'll disagree with you there, because if you've just heard the same conversation I had, there's umpteenth number of suggestions. So what do you expect the administration to bring back?
Well,
Because I heard conflicting comments on both sides. So the best thing is to bring it back as it is presented here, and then have council debate it, make motions to change it, and then administration will have a clear understanding. Because right now, I've heard both sides on the extreme. So what are you expecting to come back?
yes,
Because
we're accepting this report for information. The report itself won't change. And maybe it's the councillors that'll give them a bit more time to
generate
about
their
it.
thought and to come prepared to debate and argue their points, and hopefully they can convince enough councillors to agree with them. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it makes sense. I'm just saying, I don't know what the difference 2 weeks to a month makes, that's all.
And I would concur with you there, but the point is that what do we want them to change out of this? Unless we have a direct motion, there is nothing that they're going to change. So if we wait 2 weeks, 4 weeks, a year from now, it's still going to come back the same. Unless there's a motion to change something. Okay, so I have a question for administration. You guys asked your questions. So my question is, on the presentation that was made by administrative staff, you guys referenced 2 municipalities, St. Albert and Chestermere. That is 2. Out of how many municipalities in Alberta, percentage-wise, and then how many municipalities in Alberta actually have a vacant tax policy?
Your worship, I don't know the percentage, but that was all that we were able to locate in our research.
So you guys, on the research, located 2 municipalities that have it, out of the 600 and some municipalities in Alberta.
That's correct.
Okay, maybe that's something, food for thought. And then maybe a question again on policy and governance. With this policy, I read it fairly well and understand it. So what is the municipality trying to do? Are we trying to incentivize development in residential areas that are vacant? Or are we trying to punish property owners that are trying to invest for the future?
I think, Your Worship, if I may take a shot at that one, yeah, you know, that's part of the consideration or the thinking, you know, I mean, and you know, I mean, in my opinion, Your Worship, I'll tell you, it can be seen either way. You know, I mean, is it an incentive to get something developed? Yeah, you know, I mean, because if you don't in 7 years, you have to pay more. That could be considered an incentive. You could call it a disincentive. I think we could probably sit here all night talking about which one it is, Your Worship. So, you know, that's my perspective on that particular question.
Okay, thank you. And I also read some commentary about those help address unsightly yards and vacant lands. So if that's one of the reasons that we would like to consider this, would it not be more prudent for us to beef up our community standards bylaw? So after the 3rd strike of a vacant property that's been complained about many times year after year, is that we don't wait for the complaints to come in. We're proactively going out there and providing those tickets so that those vacant lands get addressed sooner than later, so that we can address the unsightly part of our community that is kind of touched on this bylaw.
Your Worship, you know, I mean, again, if you allow me a little bit of room here, like, you know, I mean, I've heard everything tonight on this particular discussion, you know, and to be clear, Your Worship, this is a pretty clear policy. It's not going to solve everything that just was brought up. It's not going to address all of those concerns, you know, in and out and vacant land cleanups and, I mean, all that sort of stuff. I mean, administration was asked to prepare a vacant land tax rate, you know, policy. And that's what's happened. You know, we can't address all of those questions in one particular policy. There's a strategy conversation, there's an incentive versus disincentive. I mean, there's a lot of conversation there, a lot of good conversation, but, you know, this is coming in at a specific item. Is it going to answer every one of those? Is it going to solve all those? No. You know, it's about one aspect of, you know, call what you want, development and monitoring and so on and so forth, but it's simply one aspect. And I would caution council not to make it into 10 aspects. It's one.
Okay. Thank you for your commentary. And that's all the questions that I had for my clarity and understanding. Anything else, guys? Councilor Rory?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to bring forward the comments of timeline that were discussed, you know, in the timeline that we only have 2 weeks. Well, this was brought forward back in November of last year as a request by council to bring this policy forward prior to spring adjustments. administration came back around spring adjustments, and with COVID and with everything going on, administration asked that this be deferred back to now, being September. So this has been something that council should have been considering and contemplating and looking at options and understanding over the last 10 to 12 months. So this shouldn't be news to any one of us around this table. We should be doing our due diligence. This is something that we voted in favor of, that we asked administration to bring forward. So I think delaying it any further would not be beneficial to anything. I think, as we've just heard, this is one tool in the toolbox, as we often refer to when we talk about different things, different types of incentive programs, different ways to potentially, incentivize development, different ways to, maybe avoid having to pay the additional tax, different ways to ensure that all properties are contributing equally and equitably to the infrastructure of the town. We have many ways of doing that. This is just one, and I don't think we should push this any further, but I do think there is merit in continuing to explore all of the other options as well.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? See none. Going back to the motion, which is moved by Councillor Meyer, is that we accept for information. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. And that is carried 6-1. Okay, moving on to information items and council discussion. So if anything that council has to update council on, or anything from information items that they'd like to share. We'll start over there with Councillor Laurie, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just two for me this evening. The first, through you to administration. I've had several residents asking over the last while about, obviously, the impending end of the construction season and what the risks may be to some of our more major projects, particularly 779 and Main Street. And I'm getting asked a lot, where will these projects be when construction season closes, which we know is a little bit unpredictable. But I'm starting to get the impression that many residents feel that these are nowhere near where they should be at this time of year, even though our updates say that they're pretty close. Do we have some type of an update, or will there be an update coming in the short-term future as to what the status of these projects are and what the anticipated status of them will be by the end of this construction season, and what may be overrun into next year?
Okay. Town Manager.
Yeah, I'll just ask our General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure to provide a general update comment there.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Laurie. The both projects, we understand, do have some delays. Now, the magnitude of delays is being, I guess, analyzed and scrutinized on a daily, weekly basis. But we will be able to provide status updates. The downtown project is more within our control than the other project, the highway project. But the way I would, I guess, paraphrase the overarching condition is the projects will be substantially complete, but not totally complete. So there are some things which are going to carry over to next year, and everything's being done to minimize those things and get the roads open up for winter so that next year it can be finalized and finished in an efficient manner. So that's what I can provide today, but that doesn't provide a lot of information, but we certainly will get schedules and more official correspondence out to the community.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And then the second question is in relation to the bus stops that are being installed. I've had a lot of different feedback on them. One question that I've had a couple of times is in relation to some of the bus stops have the concrete curb cut away with the slope put in for accessibility. Many of the bus stops do not. Is there a reason why some of our bus stops have full height curbs for the entire stop and some of our bus stops have actual cutaways for the accessibility down to the level of the pavement?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Laurie, I'm not aware of the answer to that question, so I'll have to research that and get back to Council.
Thank you.
Okay. And then an email update will be sufficient. Councillor Laurie?
Yep, that's all for me this evening. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Matthews, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one notice for everybody that we had our FCSS meeting this week, or sorry, yeah, this week, and last week, and We had unanimous support of the FCSS board for the realignment strategy, integrating FCSS into the town of Stony Plain. So there was lots of good discussion, good dialogue, a lot of feedback provided to the executive director. And so I felt it was a very, very good meeting with just good information sharing. So just wanted to share that they were unanimous support for it.
Thank you very much, Councilor Matthews, for the update. Councilor Loy?
Nothing this evening, Your Worship.
Councilor Pletchko?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I just want to be a little bit different than Councilor Laurie tonight. I've had many comments on the posts that I've done from the town regarding the updates to the downtown and to 779. I am told by many residents that those updates are very much appreciated and that they do explain a lot so that they're understanding of where we are in the process. So I would encourage you to continue those updates. They are very good and the residents do appreciate what's coming out of them.
Your Worship, I certainly want to acknowledge that comment if I can. I mean, the downtown stuff has been good, I believe. I believe we've gotten good information out there, both through social media and through, old-fashioned talking to people in the downtown area. I do think it's important that we acknowledge that Alberta Transportation has, in my opinion, Your Worship, over the course of this project, has certainly done a better job this year getting information to us, and we're able to share that and get it out to the public. And, Council, I'm sure will know that I can be the first person to point a finger at Alberta Transportation when we don't feel they're doing a good job, but they certainly have done, in my opinion, this past year, keeping that information coming to us, and deserve credit for that.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Meyer?
Thank you, Your Worship. Mine's going to hit on downtown as well, although I feel it's maybe not as... Anyhow, on 53rd Avenue, I've noticed some discussion being had by construction workers and construction workers wearing white hats, which means that that's probably the boss looking at the problem. Anyhow, the trees die, and then they were removed, and then I noticed a few more died, and I'm just curious if there's an issue, sorry, Your Worship, through you to administration, if there's any problem with these tree wells, or I imagine at some point the trees will be replaced. I was just wondering if I could get some kind of update there.
Yes, a good question, because I had the same question that I asked administrative staff just a little while ago. So we haven't accepted those trees yet as part of our appraisals and stuff, so it's still under the contractor, so all that, it will be replaced in terms of cracked sidewalks, trees that are not straight, that are dying, and so that will be fixed and addressed a little bit later on.
And sorry, and just to just my question about the tree wells, is there an issue with those? I mean, I know our old trees grew fine on the road, just and I know we had also gone with bigger, better tree wells, and so I'm just curious if that's an issue, or we just got bad trees.
Town manager?
I believe I'll ask the general manager to comment on that one.
Okay.
I can't see in the back of my head, so I never know if he's going to come to me or not. But, so on the tree wells, I have not heard any issues, and I will ask some questions to get back to council on the impact of the tree wells and the tree replacements, and I guess I get some more information on why those trees died in the first place, and if it was just a bad winter, or what the thought is from the people who know more about trees than I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This afternoon, council and the board of the Parkland School Division came together to announce the details of the land swap agreement and pave the way for construction to begin on the replacement school for Stony Plain Central. That was such an exciting endeavor and culmination, Mr. Mayor, that I just want to make note of it, that that this is one more step in our goal and our strategy of building towards the west, and the plans, the vision that we have for how Stony Plain can grow. I will be thrilled when that new school is built, considering the age considering the age of Stony Plain Central now. It'll be a great pleasure to have a new school in that area.
Okay, anything else? Okay. Thank you, and thank you for referencing the land swap deal that's kind of gone through now with Parkland School Division. That is a great step in our community in terms of building our community out west, especially with the replacement school of, as I remember, it's Stony Plain Junior High, because that's when I attended, that's what it was called, and the need for a replacement in that area, which is very great, and I'm glad that Parkland School Division was a collaborative and willing partner with us. Just a couple updates. On Sunday, we had, if you have noticed, a lot of bikers in town, within town Stony Plain. It was a Christmas toy rally organized by Bully NS and Urban Bulldogs against kid abuse. Their main goal is to ride and bring awareness towards the toys for children in our area, and all the toys and donations that they received and fundraise for goes directly to the Kinsman and Kinsnet Christmas Hammer program. So a huge thanks to them. As well, on Sunday, we had a chance to unveil the Stony Plain Firefighter Association's Memorial Bench, a great little asset to our community along the pathway. Again, as mentioned at the unveiling, you know, as a brotherhood and sisterhood, these brave men and women see a lot of things that we cannot comprehend. And it's good that there is this place where they can kind of take a break and stop and relax and just kind of think through what happened, and then the ability to talk to someone that has gone through the same issues and stuff. Mental health is a huge issue for first responders, and that's a great little asset for a community, for that the firefighters can sit there, and even just regular residents can have a stop on that journey and just kind of thank them, and just kind of take that opportunity to kind of reflect and kind of just gather your thoughts. We also had the christening, or the unveiling of the new fire engine 3, I believe. That replaced 3.1, and 3.1 was an old fire engine from way back 20-some years ago, so I believe it was in service for about 22 years, and it's definitely lived its full life span. And when I was talking to the chief and the fire commissioner of Parkland County, the most likely next step for engine 3.1 is retirement, so they'll probably look at a place to sell it, and hopefully another community or some place that needs a fire truck that doesn't have the same capabilities and kind of asset management as a town of Stony Plain will be able to utilize that and for service for another couple years before it goes. Just information for members of council. So on Wednesday, the chamber is having an in-person chamber meeting. That is Wednesday over at the Holiday Inn Express, and they'll have the MP Pierre Poilievre coming to speak to us. So if you're able to, please make that adjustment and show up. So which is kind of good to have an MP come out to our community. And with that, also on the 17th is Leduc and Wetaskiwin Chamber of Commerce is having their virtual kind of address, so that's interesting. So if you guys had the opportunity, I believe it was free to sign up, so you just kind of sign up and then you can log in virtually to see what's happening in our surrounding regions of Leduc and Wetaskiwin. Okay. That ends up my council information for you guys, so thank you very much for reading your agenda packages and coming with a lot of information, a lot of comments to discuss and to share that information with members of council. Administrative staff, thank you for putting the reports together. And you guys do a good job, even though that we attack you guys sometimes, because we are passionate about what we do, and we want to see the best for it, and those policies coming forward are the cumulative efforts of council and administrative staff. So thank you very much for that. With that, we're adjourned.